part of my mission is, what if entrepreneurship and professionalism looked different? What if we deconstructed it from the white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal notion of what a professional looks like?
This is Rebel Therapist, a podcast for entrepreneurs who are trained as therapists and who want to level up their businesses, make a bigger impact, feel fulfilled, and be very well paid. I'm your host, Annie Schusler. Before we jump into the episode, I want to invite you to something. I'm hosting a free open coaching call on Thursday, May 9th at 11 a.m. Pacific. And this is open to podcast listeners, past clients, and people on my email list. So that is definitely you. And I'm going to be answering questions both from people who I have never met and from current and past clients. And we always have a really good time together. I would love to see you there. You're going to register by going to rebeltherapist.me/question. This is not a webinar. It's not a workshop. I am not teaching you a skill. I'm showing up to answer the questions that you have, particularly questions about creating or marketing or managing your signature program. So please show up and give me what you've got. And when you register, you're also going to have a chance to submit a question ahead of time. So I really want to know what's going on with you, what's going on with your business, what you're celebrating, and what you're struggling with. So please sign up at rebeltherapist.me/question, and I'll see you on Thursday, May 9th at 11 a.m. Pacific. Oh yeah, and you can definitely get the recording if you cannot be there live. Hey, do you identify with the word neurodivergent or not? Either way, stay with us. In today's episode, we're talking about getting curious about yourself, the way your particular brain works, and what that means about the kind of business that will really work for you. You'll hear my guest and I both talk about some big changes we've each made to our work lives in order to honor our operating manuals. Meet Jennifer Alumbaugh. They're here to help change the cultural narrative for late identified autistic and ADHD founders, executives, and professionals. She built Expansive Expressions in order to create and deliver neurodivergent business and marketing training, support systems, and business strategies so that neurodivergent entrepreneurs can build profitable and sustainable businesses. All right. Welcome, Jennifer. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Annie, for having me. I'm excited to have a conversation with you.
Me too. So I want to ask you first, what made you shut down your private practice?
That's a good question. Yeah, there are a number of things that all these tributaries that all ended up joining to result in me closing my practice. One element was me coming into awareness of my autistic, ADHD, and variety of other neurodivergent, and learning differences, identity, and realizing the work that I was doing as a complex systems trauma therapist was not sustainable for me anymore. As I learned more about myself and what my brain and my body needs. And then there are also elements of political elements. So I live in Texas. I'm licensed here and in California, but practicing in Texas. And just a number of the laws that Texas is putting down. And here, some things don't even have to be a law. Like if the governor makes a suggestion, then people take it into their own hands to enforce. So things like the governor's suggestion that anyone who's providing gender-affirming care to minors should be reported to Child Protective Services for abuse. And that was just a suggestion in a letter, and people took that to heart. And it's been devastating for many professionals, doctors, teachers, and families. And so that was one big thing that I thought, I'm not going to stop providing gender affirming care to youth because it is life-saving. It is suicide prevention. It is harm reduction. And I will die on that hill if necessary. So I wasn't going to stop that. And I also wrestled with, ethically, I don't have a problem breaking rules that are unethical to me. But I also thought, between this and also the other significant legislation was around reproductive health care and extremely strict rulings. Like, if you even have a conversation about reproductive options, you could be criminally fined and tens of thousands of dollars criminally fined. So taking all these things into consideration, looking at my client population, which also included, in addition to trans youth and adults, some reproductive health and justice workers. So I realized that while ethically I didn't have any issues with, getting into good trouble, I didn't know how that would impact my license. And if that would prevent me from being able to practice, then I would not be able to provide for myself. So I began exploring and having some conversations with folks around what does it mean to divest from licensure as kind of an act of protest and, protest activist stance. And what then would my work look like from then?
Yeah. So these two really big streams into the tributary, I like how you said that. One being about the real ethics and needing to make good trouble, and then the other around kind of your operating manual and how the work as it existed wasn't the right fit. I'm hearing both of those are big ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that I want to share about the work not feeling like a right fit anymore, there is the element of my burnout and being cognizant of I have an ethical responsibility to care for myself so that I don't do any harm to my clients. That is obviously the last thing I would want to do. So there's an element of that, wanting to prevent getting to that point.
Mm-hmm.
There's this other element of, as a systems trauma therapist, I work with folks who are dealing with trauma as a result of various systems, whether that's family system, whether that's a high control religion system, whether that's the troubled teen industry / juvenile adult incarceration industry / foster care industry, right? Those are all connected. Or, whether it's the larger macro systems of racism, white supremacy, ableism. And I came to a place, I think several factors contributed. One being the pandemic, as this is a thing I am going through simultaneously with my clients. So I did not, there were, all of us, and, us who were practicing then had that experience. There was no degrees of separation, right? In other things that our clients bring in, sometimes we might be okay, I can relate to that. I had a similar experience years ago and I've done my work around that.
Totally. And also, Jennifer, they knew. So no matter what kind of therapist you were, if it was March 14th, 2020, there was it's not a celebration that no matter what we wanted our clients to know, they knew we were also dealing with, March 2020. So yeah, what a experience.
So there is that piece. And then also in February of 2021 in Texas, we experienced a very unusual freeze that shut down the state's power grid. And I, along with tens of thousands of people, had no power for 4 to 5 days. And I was literally frozen into my house. The roads were all closed outside. I couldn't open my garage door. And that was traumatic. I didn't recognize that until after the fact that was a really traumatizing experience. And that too is something that I went through along with my clients. And so the kind of accumulation of those two experiences and thinking about the work of systems, harm reduction and healing, kind of came to this place of like, okay, well, we might be able to do something with individual instances of trauma experiences, between one person and another. But the systemic stuff, like, we can't EMDR away racism. That's going to keep going. Mm-hmm. And as we've seen in recent years, escalating, right? Mm-hmm. Becoming more public, becoming more accepted. And so I felt like I don't know that I am capable anymore of, like, I feel like I've come to the end of where my professional training has led me. And I didn't, in having conversations with like other folks in the field, there's kind of a similar thought of like, well, this Western psychology model only goes so far. What we need is systems overhaul, which, is different than clinical work.
Yeah.
So that was also a contributing factor to kind of my divestment retirement, as well as me shifting directions into consulting to work at some of that more systems level change.
Yeah. So what's your focus now? Who are you working with now and in what way?
Yeah. So my focus now is neuroinclusion accessibility. I consult, train, speak on that. And that is about helping workplaces to build neuroinclusive and accessible cultures and operations and policies that make the workplace somewhere where neurodivergent and disabled employees can sustain and also thrive. So there's a lot of neurodivergent hiring initiatives that a lot of companies, especially tech companies, are engaging in. And there's a little bit of breakdown when it comes to like, okay, you got them in the door, but is this environment and the ways that people are interacting and solving problems and communicating, is that neuro-inclusive? Is there neuro-inclusive learning opportunities? Are we being aware of neuro-inclusive practices in performance reviews? So just kind of everything that has to do with neuroinclusion and accessibility, and kind of under that umbrella, I throw everything that has to do with like non-apparent disabilities and things that, might include like physical accommodations, but more often include change of culture accommodations.
Jennifer, this is making me think of something that has really been up for me lately, and for folks I'm talking to, is like, so as an individual with like a tiny company, I've been interested in how neurodivergent am I and in what way, and let me figure that out and figure out whether I want to get like a diagnosis or not. And a lot of folks who I'm close to are in similar situations. And then on the other hand, wondering, is that the main question, or is the main question more about how we want to look at not necessarily me focusing in quite as much on like, what's my diagnosis? Should I get diagnosed? But more, and then I know diagnosis, that's a whole other question. Yeah. But even if it's more about me self-identifying, is that the place to focus, or is it more around the whole system and how like the whole system needs to shift for all of us so that it's not just like a personal identity thing? So I guess I say all that to say you're working with these organizations, so you get to help the whole organization move, not reliant on any one person's identity or diagnosis Yeah,
I love this question. It's so important, right? Because there's some elements of both and. I will always advocate and support people exploring elements of identity for the sake of experiencing liberation in that identity, not for the sake of labeling, right? So if that process is meaningful, like for me and others that I've talked to, there is almost this instantaneous shift between like decades of trying to overcome negative self feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like almost in one moment, I was like, oh, I don't have to bully myself for that. Like, this is an accommodation that I need because of these different disabilities or limitations. And that was incredibly liberating. Like, all of the therapy that I did across a lifetime of like 42 years, I was still struggling with, like, how do I be kind to myself and compassionate? And this one set of pieces of information about how my brain and my body work kind of unlocked that for me. And it's been a game changer. So in that way, I'm always going to champion people exploring what names help them feel seen and known and complete. But the other piece that you mentioned, I think is so valuable. And this is part of what I am on a mission, part of what I like preach or talk about in my writings and in my talks around what if we approach things from a lens of curiosity and just universal human need.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I don't go around informing employees how to diagnose themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not what it's about. You know, I talk about characteristics, but the more important piece is let's be mindful that people have different learning styles. You don't have to be knowledgeable about all the learning styles. Let's be mindful that people have different communication styles. You don't have to know all the styles. Just be aware. Let's be mindful that people have different energy fluctuations and different times of day that their brains are firing on all cylinders and times of the day where they're like, I'm done. I hit a wall. They will not get anything more productive out of me today. And the awareness of all of these different ways of communicating, interacting, collaborating, working together invites curiosity so that like I want people to break out of the idea that there is one way to do things and one way of being,
Mm-hmm.
right? So sometimes that shows up in a supervisor sends out an email asking for people to provide some kind of information and response. And maybe one person hits reply, provides the answer, and sends. Maybe another person on the team hits reply and like, hey, hi, how's it going? I checked in the report and this is what I found. Right? Like they're both accomplishing the goal of answering the question. One is direct, no fluff. And one is just a different way of communicating of like having a greeting and bringing in some other elements. But oftentimes the one that's direct is interpreted as rude or, wow, they must be angry at me or some kind of negative thing. There's assumptions being made, which then inform how people are interacting with each other. So if somebody assumed like, wow, that was a really rude email, and then they saw them later in the break room, they might be interacting with like tension or an attitude or something that can quickly snowball into little like no or very poor communication. And if they're on the same team, that's going to impact productivity and efficiency and, you know, projects moving forward in the way that they need to.
Wow. So even like for me, I feel like my natural, if there's such a thing as natural, I don't know. I mean, I've been interacting with humans my whole life, but if there was sort of a natural mode for me, it would probably be that very efficient first one you named. But like, I feel like I've been taught for so long, especially as a woman, like I've been taught for so long to fluff it up, give it some emojis, soften it, apologize for, I don't know, anything.
Existing, right? Like that's what we're taught. Absolutely. If I'm in a zone, I'm like, all right, let me just like fire off this email, answer the question. And then sometimes I have to catch myself because I will just be like, da 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 da. And I'm like, you could at least say like, hi, Susan.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the answer. So I will like go back and put in some of the other things because I don't want to create a problem.
Yes.
But that, I mean, it's not an extraordinary burden, but it takes extra effort and time from just doing it. And those are the things that, like you said, like There's your natural state, and then what we've been socialized and conditioned to do, especially as women, especially as femme people who were socialized as women, whatever your gender is now.
Yeah.
The expectations of we are to be pleasant, we are to make sure other people have a pleasant experience in our presence. We're here to make people feel good and be cute and pretty and smile and obedient and compliant, right? Like all of these social expectations, sometimes family, sometimes religious expectations on gender roles, they train us how to mask our natural state so that we are, performing what is expected of us. But this is what can lead to significant burnout for folks. Like part of what I experienced, I was at 42, I was like, I can't function anymore. What is going on?
Yeah.
Why did I used to be able to function and my brain worked and now it doesn't? And part of it was just like my brain and my body saying, this is too energy consuming to perform these expectations of society. And even, like as a business owner, perform like a neurotypical or neuronormative business owner or entrepreneur of like the hustle and grind. And, if you're not like, working for your business 24/7, then you're not really committed, right? There's so much messaging that pressures us into these ways of performing and masking outside of what actually our brains and our bodies need.
Yes. We'll get right back to this episode. I just wanted to pause for a moment to tell you about my offer for therapists and healers who want to expand beyond private practice and launch their own programs. You get to be in a group of driven and open-hearted folks like yourself, and you'll be launching your own pilot program. This all happens in my 10-week container, Create Your Program. Go to rebeltherapist.me/create to learn more. Okay, let's get back into the episode. So you do that work with organizations, and then, most of the folks who are listening to this are running companies of one or tiny companies, and you also work with those folks.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah. What do you notice there? What do you find is happening for people in their neurodivergence, in their businesses? What are they grappling with? And then what is kind of helping?
Yeah. So a lot of the folks in community that I facilitate and hold space with, which is called the Neurodivergent Collective, and there's a lot of therapists in there who are neurodivergent themselves, often late identified, and a couple of folks who aren't therapists are teachers, educators, also in like people professions. And a lot of the conversation we have is around how do we make our own business accessible and equitable for ourselves, right? Because if we are not charging the kinds of fees that are necessary for our own sustainability, then we can get into the territory of like exploiting ourselves in our work, right? Even if it's unintentionally. And if we are, not being mindful of what are the boundaries and the limits of my brain and my body, what do I need? How do I need to strategically manage my capacity? Sometimes instead of managing time, it's managing capacity, but sometimes it's both. How do I need to do that in order to take the best care of myself? So, that might look like going to a virtual meeting might allow for more capacity because the person doesn't have to leave, get in the car, travel across town, find parking, go into the event, be at the space, and then do everything in reverse. That takes more time and more capacity.
And the small talk that you need to do on your way into that gathering and then on the way you're out of that gathering. Those are the ones I'd be like, whoo. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you have 1 hour event that is going to demand very different amounts of capacity of like in person versus virtual. So we talk about kind of strategic capacity management. How do we communicate that with our clients? And what is that like to be in practice of caring for ourselves, even if that means I get a cancel session today because I have a migraine and I'm not going to be fully present with you. I respect your time and we will reschedule. And I need to care for myself so that I can show up in the best way, right? That's part of it, is modeling for our clients what they can give themselves permission to do. And then there are also elements of what does it really look like to build a business that is neuro-inclusive for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And for many people, that also includes like values alignment. There's a lot of folks who are neurodivergent who are passionately justice-centered. And so we have conversations around what does ethical commerce look like as opposed to, a capitalist model of business. What does it look like to be building something that's more of a social enterprise versus, just pure profit-driven business? So there's a whole range of questions that we explored together. And one of the elements that people gain from the space is the community itself, is being in the presence regularly. Like we have coaching circles, we have twice a week co-working sessions. There's lots of times to be around each other. And I can't tell you how many times people come in just like their whole body relaxes because they're like, I know I don't have to mask here. I can be weird. I don't have to have the camera on. I can have my fidgets. I can be fidgeting. They know that they can show up in their most real selves and not be judged as less professional because of it or less credible, which I think can happen in some other spaces.
Oh, that's good, Jennifer. So I say something on my CYP calls, create your program calls, where I will say in the beginning, all right, I know you're on a lot of calls. I know you've got a lot of video calls, many of you. And my fantasy is that this one will feel some ease to it. That yes, I know you're going to come in with questions and work to do. And I would love it if you just felt a little bit of ease of I can eat here. I could lie on the floor here. I could turn off my camera if I need to. And I think that piece you just said, and not be judged as less professional, is a piece that I hadn't named before and feels so right. You're with other professionals and we're all weirdos, but we're doing amazing work and are not going to be judged for being less so because of how weird we are. I love that.
Yes. Or even what needs we have. The other day, you and I were supposed to have a conversation on this day. My power went out and it came back on. It went out 3 different times that day. And by the 3rd time, I was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
Don't ask the turning the closed sign on the door. We are shut down. Try again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because I just I was just autistic ADHD shutdown. It was my brain and my body couldn't cope. And so ended up canceling most of the day because of that, between the not having power and also just the overwhelm.
The impact of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wrestled with myself internally. I decided to make a post about it on LinkedIn because I was this is part of modeling. One, I'm still so in process with deconstructing the ableism within myself. And I was doing battle with myself. One part of me beating myself up, come on, pull it together. You should be able to show up. You made a commitment to these people. It's so unprofessional. The other part of me is but this is the piece of being my authentic self and honoring my brain's capacity was done.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrestled with whether I post about this on LinkedIn. And then I decided to, as a way to normalize these are things. I am no less professional. I am no less qualified to be doing these things because I had to cancel, because my brain and my body shut down due to these unexpected stressors. And that's something I'm so passionate about modeling because, and especially on a place like LinkedIn, because there are a lot of, potential spaces for like perception and judgment and assumptions, right? So part of my mission is, what if entrepreneurship and professionalism looked different? What if we deconstructed it from the white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal notion of what a professional looks like?
Yeah. And in that example of when you needed to cancel or reschedule our conversation, if you had been somehow able to like have it happen, the power's on at the right time, we could have had it, we still would have been sort of dealing with urgency, right? Like we would have been dealing with unnecessary urgency, because the truth is like, we're going to be able to do that appointment. I get to be on your show. That's what's happening, right? We get to do that appointment anyway. And so that like idea of all this urgency that we need to like just cram ourselves into situations because they're on the calendar is really, it doesn't lead to as good of work either, which I think is something you've been saying today. It actually doesn't lead to better work. Right.
It doesn't lead to better work. It doesn't lead to our own sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that in like trying to model this as well, like I'm trying to model simultaneously as like figuring it out, right? Like we're all just figuring this out. But one of the things when anyone has to reschedule with me, I make sure to say, I love that you are doing what you need to care for yourself. And I absolutely support that. No problem. Because I never want somebody to feel guilty or like sick to their stomach about having to communicate that with me, because I have felt that with others.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's another piece of like how we can affirm one another, or sometimes check in. Sometimes I get on a call with somebody and I check in with how they're doing. They're like, it's just been such a stressful day. And I ask, would it be helpful to have an extra 50 minutes in your day to rest? We can reschedule, no problem. And sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, that's allowed? Like I could just get back 50 minutes. I'm like, yes, absolutely. And I want those things to be normal rather than extraordinary.
Yes. Will you tell us about how, like explaining it to it as if we know nothing about LinkedIn, because many of us don't. Like, how exactly do you use LinkedIn?
Yeah, that's it. That's great. I keep saying it's a good question because all your questions are great, and I love being asked questions. So I'm in my happy place. So yeah, I built a profile on LinkedIn a million years ago, and then it collected dust for probably 5 years. And when I was shifting out of being a therapist to consultant, one, just for anyone else who has done that or anyone else who is thinking about that, just there is something that happens if you're not like a TikTok therapist, going from the very confidential behind the scenes, doing quiet work with your clients role of a therapist to very public thought leadership speaker, got to get testimonials and reviews role of a consultant or a coach. There's some culture shock there. So just as a warning. But part of that process was I was like, all right, I got to dust off my LinkedIn. So I read a few things about like once you get 100 connections on LinkedIn, your posts will start going out to more people. And one of the main things that I've used LinkedIn for is writing and just kind of sharing, educating people about what is neuroinclusion, why does it matter, why should we care about it. And I found I was pleasantly surprised by finding kind of my people, my neighborhood, that I always tell people, I'm like, okay, LinkedIn can be scary, yes. But like when you go on LinkedIn, come to my neighborhood. We're like anti-racist, anti-oppression, ethical commerce, neurodivergent, queer, trans neighborhood of LinkedIn. And it is a beautiful place where people are integrating, having conversations around, the legislations on, trans existence. And yes, this does have to do with the workplace because your trans employees are going to be dealing with this and because Yes, the laws around DEI are going to impact your workplace because So there's these beautiful conversations that are happening about, like, we don't actually leave ourselves at the door when we go into work. So the things that are happening around us politically, socially, those things are absolutely relevant to professional conversations.
How did you find that neighborhood?
I think that I started out like just seeking out other like DEI practitioners because I was like, there's not I made up the title Neuro Inclusion Accessibility Consultant. Like that's not a thing yet, right?
Yeah.
As much. So I was like, okay, like maybe it has to do with HR, maybe it has to do with DEI. So I just started, seeking out HR, DEI folks and connecting with them if, maybe I saw a post that they wrote that I really resonated with, or one of the things I discovered early on was LinkedIn audio live shows that have been like one that I go to pretty much every Friday morning. It's called DEI ER. And it's run by Raven Solomon. And that's been an amazing place to build community with people who also care about these things. And so then from like, hey, I saw you in the audience at DIER. I'd love to grab a virtual coffee with you. Or attending another one that I regularly attend is called Power of the Pack, put on by the Female Quotient. And the organizer, Amber, calls it an equity watch party. So the comment section is alive with, people responding to what the panelists are talking about. And it's another space to like, oh, here are my people. Here are people who care about the issues and the matters that we're discussing. And then, kind of like other social media platforms, it's like, well, you like this person, maybe you will connect with this person. So then, I guess it's like teaching the algorithm, like, these are the things that I want to talk about. So then that branches out into folks who are, teaching anti-oppression marketing and copywriting. And it goes into, folks who are, just in a number of different roles. Maybe they're in a role that has nothing to do with this, but they themselves are a trans person who is outspoken about that and about justice matters.
And so when you find somebody who you're interested in what they're doing, you'll reach out to them directly and suggest having a chat?
Yeah. So I usually start with like a connection request. And then, if they accept the request, then I follow up with a message that's like, whatever, like, hey, I really appreciate what you said in the comments of this event. And I'd love to chat with you more about, to learn more about that or what you said or the work that you're doing.
So it's specific. Like that doesn't surprise me at all. That's like specific. And I feel like sometimes we've all gotten messages from someone, whether it's on LinkedIn or somewhere else, where it's just like, I'm inspired by the work you're doing. And it feels like, you don't know what work I'm doing. So yeah, like something that really shows I am connecting with you about this specific thing that matters. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, there are people that I've just like sometimes in the LinkedIn search bar, I will just search like DEI or accessibility and people with accessibility in their job title. And so like I randomly will click on people because I don't know, they had cool or interesting or relatable things in their like bio line that shows directly after their name and photo. And so I'll go to their profile and I'll read through, look at some of the posts that either they're writing or they're sharing, and then I might reach out to them. So maybe I didn't have any other connection with them before, but I say, hey, I happened across your profile. I saw your post about this and I really connected with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm like, I always think I would love to get the kind of message that I send to people I don't know.
It's like truly thoughtful. Yeah. So you're connecting with people and talking to them, and then you're also posting on LinkedIn?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I write posts, and occasionally when I'm too verbose for the post and I go over the word limit, then I write articles. So you can write articles on LinkedIn. One of the benefits of writing articles is that in a search engine search, your article title will come up higher because it's attached to the linkedin.com prefix. And so it's one way to generate visibility. There are folks who write newsletters and have their people subscribed through LinkedIn. So yeah, I do a lot of writing, engaging in conversations with other folks that I'm following. My talk show broadcasts to LinkedIn as well as Facebook and YouTube, but that's another place where, I'm connecting with people and like, hey, I would love to have this conversation on my talk show. So I invite folks, or conversation comes out of, hey, I saw your talk show and you're talking about this. Blah, blah, blah.
And do you have a newsletter also?
Not right now. There is one that exists in time and space.
Not right now. Well, there's only, like, speaking of capacity, there's only so many things that you could do at a time. Okay, so you post, you write articles. How often would you say that you're either posting or writing an article?
I'm posting let's say at least 5 out of the 7 days. Like, there are times where I will just be inspired and write something on a Saturday and I post it. So LinkedIn is where I'm most active, in having conversations, spending time engaging with other people's posts. Yeah. So
something else I've noticed about your marketing is that you have a lot, like you have so many speaking engagements. You're on a lot of podcasts, like you're doing a lot there. Do those opportunities come through your LinkedIn engagement mostly, or other ways?
Yeah, a number of them have been through there. So, like you show up enough times at a place and people like get to know your name and face. So Amber of the Female Quotient had reached out to me, I don't know, sometime last year. I was like, hey, I am loving the content you're putting out. I love what you're talking about. I want to have a conversation and, maybe bring you on as a panelist. So that was one of those organic kind of things that happened. We're talking about another episode idea for later this fall. Same with Raven Solomon's DEIER, just kind of being a regular participant. And I think at one point I reached out to them. I was like, hey, if you ever want to do like neuro inclusion and DEI, let me know. So I put myself out there, and then they were like, actually, yes, we want to do a neuro inclusion episode. So they did one last June, and they're like, okay, there's so much here. We need to have a part 2. So they did a part 2, I think earlier in the fall. And then this year, Raven has had a number of engagements that take her away on Fridays. So they're like, does anyone want to help with co-hosting? I'm like, yeah, sign me up. So I've been a volunteer co-host and just been a part of like facilitating conversations with other folks. So that's a lot of where these things come from, is organically out of the relationship building, out of the, somebody hears me talk on one place and they're like, oh, you have things to say. Cool. Maybe you can come over here. Kind of like you and I.
Nice. I love that. Let's see. Anything you want to leave us with about like things that we might keep in mind in terms of like figuring out and following our own operating manual in our businesses?
Yeah, I think it's important to do the self-reflection required to identify, what is my learning style? What is my communication style? How do I like to receive feedback? What is my management style if I'm a leader? How do I want to be led or managed by someone else? What are my professional goals, for entrepreneurs? is that? Do you want to go from a solo business to building out an agency or a company that, is scaled? What are the goals? And then what accommodations are necessary to do that well and sustainably?
Beautiful. I know for me, a huge one has been giving myself permission to have a lot less face-to-face time in my business, and watching Tara McMullen make a huge change around that. And she came on Rebel Therapist and talked about how and why she did it. Like, that helped me take permission, and having, like, really looking at what are the things I have capacity for? What are the things I have a lot less capacity for? And like you said, working on, but I should be able to do it that way. Look, that person can do it that way. And it's generous to do it this way. But really questioning those things on a fundamental level, like, what do I have capacity for with the way my brain and body work, where I can actually do my best work sustainably and enjoy it some of the time, or hopefully a lot of the time.
Yes, absolutely. And even small businesses that maybe, just have a couple of roles that are contracted out. There's still a development process that goes from being, kind of the doer of all the things, wearing all the hats, to leading the organization. And this might be another hill that I'll die on, but there's definitely a difference between people who lead their companies and people who run their companies. And I think a lot of leadership development is skipped over because, it's just this person is next in line, or this is the next thing. I mean, just, kind of move them along without actually assessing, is this person a leader? Do they have the capability of being trained into leadership? And what does that mean for their different responsibilities that go with leadership than, go with other things? And some of that is stepping back from all the in-person meetings. Oftentimes leaders are not necessarily the ones who are doing the front client-facing work. They're doing things more in the background. But that too impacts people's capacity too, because there are folks who are like, ooh, I got into leadership and I really miss the client-facing work, and I am not a fan of this administrative being in charge of stuff work.
Yeah.
Right? And then there are folks who are like, I love client-facing work, and also I want to be, kind of working with the systems and the operations side of things.
So deep exploration.
Yes. Yeah. Self-awareness. I think I think curiosity, outward curiosity and inward curiosity would go so far in transforming workplace dynamics. And that I will be a broken record on that. Just like, can we please lead with curiosity?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. I love your questions. Obviously, I love talking about all these things and having a space to share these ideas and kind of dream together about what is possible.
All right. Awesome, Jennifer. I loved that conversation.
Me too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Learn more about Jennifer at expansiveexpressions.com. I want to thank Ames Palms for editing this podcast. If you found this episode supportive, please do a couple of things. Share it with your favorite therapist or healer. That is absolutely the most important way we reach more people. And if you haven't already, please hit follow and give us 5 stars. That is so helpful to this podcast. And thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time. This is funny. The visual of balloons just came up because of what I did with my hands. It's a celebration.